I'm going to start by thanking our sponsors. You'll see from the splash slide here, Wrangle is featured as our venue sponsor and a longtime supporter of AgileTO. And so many thanks to Wrangle for their ongoing support and participation. Agile Alliance, who support us with the meetup site that he used to sign up for this event. And finally, Squirrel North for offering to support us in this Zoom account and in the technical minutia of presenting this event. So I guess there's not much more to do but to introduce Jason Little, who's going to be the speaker tonight. Let me just switch back. Actually, I guess I have to stop sharing here. I'm not going to say a lot about Jason. I expect most of you have seen Jason at one time or another at various Agile-related events. He's a pillar of the community, and with no further ado, I'll pass it over to Jason to present, to introduce himself and present.
Cool. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I think the last one was Organizational Development 101 a couple summers ago for AgileTO. So thanks for having me back. So just a brief introduction. I started as a developer back in the 90s. So if anybody still has any of those Harlequin romance novels lying around, I built their newsletter engine back before the MailChimps and all of these other things existed. So that's where I got my start. And then I moved into helping companies with Agile, I guess in the early 2000s. So a few of the startups that I worked for, we were always working in an Agile way. This would have been around 2001-ish or so. And so we were using a lot of the practices without knowing what any of that stuff was. It just seemed like a natural fit. So we were limiting our work in progress. We were using short iterations. We were, retrospectives were going out for beers every Friday just to see how things were going, tuning and adjusting. And the mid-2000s, I started working with a variety of different companies. I've been a product owner, I've been a scrum master, tester, internal coach, external coach, pretty much any size of company. And what got me started down the path of change was, I think, probably the first large transformation that I worked on in around 2007 or 8 or so. And I was sitting in the office of the senior director of the PMO and the senior manager of development. And we were going to run our, 6th or 7th Agile pilot in this company. And they said, this is a real critical project. We want to run this as an Agile project, but we don't want Agile to get in the way. And my answer to them was, well, there's only 4 values. Which ones of those would you like me to not follow or ignore? And then I realized what they were really saying was, well, if this project goes to hell, it's us that our heads are on the block, not yours. So it was a eye-opening experience into the world of organizational change, and that these 2 folks that had an attitude that we see with people who we think are resisting Agile, really it became a fear thing for them. So they have this entire organization behind them that they have to manage and deal with and stitch things together. So that got me started down this path. And let me just share my screen. A few of the concepts that have influenced my work over the years, after diving into the org change world, going to 12 or 13 different countries, visiting many different types of organizations, running hundreds of workshops, talking to people, finding these common patterns that people are getting stuck with. There's hundreds of change methods out there, and what I wanted to do was to try to find what's the common thing, what are the universals that we're all faced with. And it started from, as an external, seeing change as a start middle, and end. And this is a common thing that you might see in the change world today, which is we need to capture the current state, we need to transition and manage towards the future state that we want to create. Or Kurt Lewin talks about the idea of unfreeze, change, and refreeze. And for those who don't know Kurt Lewin, if you're familiar with the force field analysis or the Agile Speedboat retrospective game, it's influenced by his work. His work is much deeper than that. Most are familiar with the force field analysis part. So the unfreeze, change, and refreeze was one of his ideas in change as well. So, and I found that if you're coming at it from an external, so, anybody on the call who's an external coach consultant, you're there for 3 months or 6 months or a year, whatever it is, you're kind of locked into this finite game, this finality, there's a starting point. You need to push to get to an end point because your time is limited. Whereas change works more like waves over time. And ideally the waves will increase and things will get a little bit better over time. And for anybody who's been doing change work or agile coaching, for the last 10 years or so, you've probably noticed a lot of the enterprise companies, they've been transforming for that long or more. And every year they run a different transformation program with, okay, what's our current state? Let's capture our future state. Let's create some measurements. Let's create some metrics. Let's, create the plan to do this. Let's roll it out. They come to the end of the year, they go, well, that didn't exactly work the way we want. Let's throw the VP of Agile out, or let's get rid of this consulting group and bring in a new consulting group in, and then let's go again. And then it gets a little bit better. So, but we still want to think of it as a start, middle, end, because there is certainty in that. There's a lot of language coming out of the change and agile communities because they're kind of converging from two different places, that change is a journey, change is ongoing, change is evolutionary. It doesn't really work as a current state, transition, future state type of thing. So the reason why the waves of change are important is because if we can accept that the people in the organization are the ones that are affected by it, and they're the ones that have more of a luxury of time where they can let change take its natural course, we can more align the way that we work as change agents with the natural pace of change. Because every organization has it. Anybody who's worked in an enterprise, the pace is obviously slower. It might be faster in some pockets, but we need to align our way of acting and behaving with the natural pace of change that the organization can sustain in the market that they're in as well. So the second thing that became clear was most of the change agents that I've seen, whether it's, I'm just finishing up a year-long program with a global manufacturing company. They're in 65 different countries, and their main change lead, I guess if you wanted to call her that, is like a switchboard operator. So they do have a central change group, but she works in the white space. So she's connected with HR, she's connected with agile coaches, she's connected with the external consultants, etc. And a lot of it is her directing people to where they can find help and answers. So it's not creating a change method or a standardized change approach and getting people to follow it across this enterprise. It's more like, okay, well, I know the guys in Spain have solved this, so let me patch you through to them and let's facilitate a conversation about what they did. Maybe that will help you out. So, the waves of change, that's how change always happens. That's how it happens in society as well. Change agents, more like air traffic controllers, switchboard operators, think of, a central change team as a call center. So they're there to support the organization instead of trying to standardize and push one specific method or framework out. They're there to help people learn to think in their own context. So this was a common pattern that these two things, it didn't really matter what country, didn't really matter, but the size of the company. Industry mattered a bit more. I mean, a bank is a bank no matter where. There's maybe two that I know of and I've worked with overseas that just have a different philosophy for how they approach transformation. But the people in there just have a different attitude. They don't have the list of roles, responsibilities, and process. They more kind of feel their way through it because they know they're in it for the long term. And that led to 5 distinct patterns over time, which was how do we focus on the right things at the right time to move change one step forward, versus how do we create the perfect method and the perfect plan and the perfect measurements at the start and steamroll the organization with it. So context matters a lot. Transformational change is different from process improvement, which is different from moving printers, which is different from implementing big software systems. So we can't really standardize one kind of approach across the board. So these 5 things were based on seeing what was working in organizations. And when they can follow a cause and a purpose, as opposed to what we hear in the change community is urgency. There needs to be urgency for change. Urgency is one biased view, usually from the perspective of the board or the organization. So it's urgent for us, for you guys to change because we need to get revenue up. If you're a tester on a team, do you really care if you're going to make $1 billion company an extra few bucks by changing and working in a more agile way? No, that's not probably very compelling for you. So we need to figure out, how do we align people around a common cause and purpose? How do we encourage meaningful dialogue instead of broadcasting communications at people? And this is something that's very common in the change world, is we need a comms plan. So things like, we're going to do a town hall, we're going to take questions from the audience, but it's carefully scripted and it's curated by the comms people.
I just reminded Jason, if you don't mind me jumping in, you said something about questions. Just want to encourage people who are on this session to use the Q&A. You'll see a link on your screen to post questions that we'll ask after you're done your talk.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, just about 2 or 3 more minutes, and then we'll get into questions. So feel free to start adding those things. Meaningful dialogue. So instead of scripting town halls and seeding questions that you want the leaders to be seen answering, use Slido, use anonymous questions where it's not curated. Co-creation over getting buy-in. So selling change is always something that comes out in the change world. So how do I get managers to buy in? My question becomes, then what the hell are you doing as a change person? If people aren't bought into the change, why are you doing what you're doing? Experimentation over just executing activities. Experimentation works great with uncertainty, and it works great with certain types of change. And, you know, if you're moving printers or doing a big software implementation, there's much less uncertainty compared to what we talk about when we want to try to shift cultures or do these massive organizational transformations. And the last is kind of my favorite one. You know, resistance to change means I did everything I was supposed to do. It's everybody else's fault. They resisted change. Resistance is good data. Passive, active, or apathy is good data because it tells you how people are reacting to this change, tells you what you should do next. So it's not something that needs to be overcome with Newtonian force. It's more as an input into what your next set of experiments are. So these 5 patterns were the things that stuck out over the last 6 years, traveling, visiting companies, running workshops, etc. So the foundation of it was, you know, less emphasis on process and structure. Have, you know, lean change management. Lean is as thin and as lightweight as possible. Get rid of everything that people in your organization won't care about when it comes to your approach for change, because that puts your emphasis on what's actually important for people versus, you know, kind of following your method and your process. So I see a couple of questions. So Trish, if you wanted to jump in and see if there's anything popping on the Slack or anywhere else.
Yeah, we have a couple here. We have one from Jeffrey Thompson. What's the relationship between sustained change, HR rewards systems? Given that we have a lot of organizations that still have an HR that, you know, rewards and performance reviews.
Sustained change for me is a weird one because a lot of my work is influenced by Virginia Satir, and sustained change for me is the new status quo, which eventually becomes the old status quo. So I saw the question on there, but it just disappeared. So did it get deleted?
It looks like, oh, it's back. It's a second now. Someone's dismissing them, I think, when they're done, so.
Aha, okay. Yeah, sustained change implies there's an end. And it isn't an end, we elevate to a new status quo. We elevate to a new temporary state before the next foreign element comes and changes things again. Performance management can be a powerful trigger for change. So depending on how it's implemented, I've seen far too many times where the director of change or whoever is accountable for it is incentivized through performance management, which usually gets the opposite effect from what I've seen. But we never reach a state and stay there. It's always evolving, and just the pace is a little bit different for different departments, different teams, and the organization as a whole.
Very cool. Next one. How does cause and purpose change from one change wave to the next?
It gets deeper, ideally. So I've seen a pattern, especially with large organizations, where the first wave is get all those people the agiles. Here's our standardized process. Here's our onboarding checklist. Here's our 8 stacks of hierarchy in our COE. Implement this process. And then the second wave, it becomes, oh, maybe it should be more like a playbook. Maybe it should be more, here's 10 things, like pick something for your context. And then the third wave is, well, that got us a little bit further, but it's still kind of not where we thought it should be. Maybe now we need to go and figure out how to have a more engaging employee experience. Then we need to get to innovation factories and stuff. So every company I've seen has gone through this. They at the very beginning, a very low maturity organization when it comes to agile and innovation, or like a very conservative one, will tend to always start with just basic process stuff. And they're going to get to a point of starting to use lean startup and design thinking, but you can't give them that message now. They have to go through that first wave and learn themselves towards why they need to do something different.
Cool. I'm going to go one that's got the higher vote here. What are some of your recommendations related to gaining buy-in from multiple departments to supporting sustained change?
Co-creation for me is always more important than buy-in. So it's develop what needs to change with the people who have to live with the consequence. And there's nothing to sell. So a friend of mine likes to say the people who write the plan don't fight the plan. So if we're always pushing and selling, something's not right. We're not aligned. We're not coalescing around a common purpose. It's like kind of pushing water uphill with a stick.
But pushing is quite normal in many organizations, yes?
Yes, usually because what the change people are doing, whether it's coming from HR, agile coaches, or change manager group, is misaligned with the organization's objectives, and vice versa, from what I've seen.
Yep, fair enough. Would you say business analysts are key players in lean change management?
Business analysts are key players in lean change management?
Yeah. Would you say that business analysts are key players?
That question doesn't compute. Business analysts, I mean, they're people who would be affected by the change. They should be involved in the creation of it.
Right.
They should at least be able to opt in or opt out. So I'm a fan of diversity and inclusion. Invite everybody to the party, ask them to dance, and let the people who want to sit on the sides, let them opt out.
Yeah. So it's not just, so key players aren't just business analysts. It's you, like you say, you do the invitation and then.
Jason, just a suggestion. Maybe stop sharing your screen at this point, just so that there's more interaction in terms of the responses.
Stop share. There you go.
Great, thank you.
Cool, thanks, Tom.
Okay. Any accelerators getting them through the first wave quicker?
It's going to happen at the pace the organization changes. It's something that all organizations desire. How do we change faster? You change faster with focus. I mean, time is your only obstacle. Usually I see an agile transformation or whatever the change is just one more thing on top of the pile. and we don't take stuff away so people can focus. It's kind of like trying to change the engine of the plane while you're flying. You've got to take stuff away from people so they have time to dedicate to the change. And if you don't, it's just not going to happen. There's nothing you can do to push it.
Very cool. All right. Here's a long one here. Do you say, I'm just going to read this.
Okay.
Do you say, I'm going to help you change, and the best way to do that is lean change management, especially with orgs who are more familiar with plan-based change approaches? Or do you simply get transformation clients who want a lean change management approach?
I follow the ideas in Patrick Lencioni's awesome book that no one's heard of called Getting Naked, and it's his naked consulting model. So it's not as cool as it sounds.
Sorry.
It's basically, the whole premise is you go in, you start working. Like you don't go in with, here's how great our company is, here's the method we follow, I'm going to use this approach for this. You go in and you just start working for them, and then you decide if you can help. So I very rarely, if ever, lead with any method process thing at all. It's usually to uncover the problem first and then try to find a fit. So I basically just start using it without saying anything. The only time that, to be more intentional about it is actually I had a call last week with a global food company that wants to create an org change method for their organization based on it. So they came and said, hey, we want to apply this to our thing. What would that look like? So then we actually talk about the mechanics and stuff. But for me personally, that's why it's, working in the white space and just go in and start doing it. And then, because you're trying to solve problems. All companies want change people to solve problems. They don't want a method. They don't want design thinking. They don't want agile. They're trying to solve some problem. We got to pick at that as change people first before we assume you hired me as an agile coach, therefore I'm giving you agile. That's not what they want. We've got to pick.
Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
I just posted a link to the book in the chat in case anyone's interested.
Cool. That book is fantastic. For anybody on the call who's a consultant, I put it up there with Jerry Weinberg's Secrets of Consulting, Volume 1 and 2. It's a great read.
Secrets of Consulting.
Yeah, 1 and 2.
Trish is avidly taking notes, I can tell.
Oh, you can't see it because my thing, but I do have Getting Naked. I haven't read it, so I will put that on my weekend list to do. So thank you. Okay, sorry, just going through here. All righty, next one. You said change is context dependent, but in your model, you present 5 principles. This implies any kind of context will fit in these. How so?
Yes. First, they're not principles. I call them the 5 universals of change. I don't believe methods and frameworks can have values or principles. It's not possible. People have those things. If you see them advertised in a method, it's either reflects the creator's personality or they're just intentional for marketing. So these are not principles. These are 5 universals that when you find the right balance between them, it helps you move change forward. So an example would be, if you are moving people from floor 1 to floor 2, having a cause and a purpose to rally around makes no sense. Neither does urgency. Make a list of all the stuff you got to move and move it. So it's kind of like, think of each of these as teeter-totters. At the beginning of a change, maybe more sense of cause and purpose to give people something to rally around, maybe more meaningful dialogue so you can actually find what the right things are, and then you might have to tip the balance back the other way depending on the culture. So organizations that are very conservative, rule process driven control cultures will very rarely, if ever, respond to cause, purpose, meaningful dialogue, co-creation. It will be Newtonian force, which will get you started, and then maybe you can start to pull back a little bit.
in some of these larger organizations, I know there's no end time, but this can take a long time, correct? Change is not, I know people say I want to be agile and I want to be, and they pick a framework, and quite often they think it can be done rather quickly, but it can't. It takes a long time because it's more about the mindset, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Can you say more about what's different between responding to change versus resisting change? Is resisting to change not one way some respond to change? That's good. I like that one.
Yeah, that's good. It's very subtle, the difference between the two. So resistance to change is usually what we hear from change agents, whether that's, HR people, change managers, agile coaches, whatever. Those people aren't exhibiting the behaviors that I think they should be, given we're moving to an agile way of working. Therefore, they are resisting change. The managers don't want to do the stuff that we're trying to do. Those developers won't do TDD like we're telling them to. They're resisting is usually the default stance. Response to change is looking at how they're reacting to that foreign element. So the foreign element in terms of this Virginia Satir's work is some event that happens that disrupts the status quo, and then people react to that. So if they're reacting in a way that says, oh, this is stupid. We tried an agile transformation 2 years ago. It didn't work. I'm not doing any of this. That's the perfect opportunity to switch the stance from, well, look at that response. That's what you would call an active pushback. What are we learning from this? Awesome. Great. You did this 2 years ago. Let's get in a room and let's start with a retrospective. Let's do an inventory of all the things that we tried. What worked? What did we miss? What could we try next time? So instead of, well, you just didn't do it right, or you weren't agile enough, or you didn't get the mindset, that's why it didn't work. You go, okay, well, awesome. Let's pick at this thing and let's get curious instead of furious.
Yeah. I find that some of the resistance is I try something at work, and if it doesn't quite work, they want to stop. Oh, they won't do it anymore. So, no, you try something a little bit different. So just adding to that. Okay, we have one more question here. I don't know if there's anything in the chat by error. How does cause and purpose change from one change wave to the next?
We answered that. I answered that one, didn't I?
Oh, sorry, my apologies. I didn't close it. There we are. We have questions.
Well done.
I have a question for you, though. Can you recommend any Virginia Satir books for people? Because you've mentioned her a few times.
Go to satirglobal.org. There'll be a wealth of resources there.
Satirglobal.org?
Yeah. Most focus on just the J curve. Like they have month-long retreats, week-long retreats, and it's very deep. But most people just focus on the little J curve, and they go, here's how we continually improve our way from one state to another, which is doesn't make any sense. That's not how people experience change. So if we understand how these interactions manifest themselves, if we look at our responsibility, the responsibility of others within a certain context, we move to what she calls congruence, which is I'm considering what I need as a change person. I'm considering the people I'm coaching, whether it's leaders, teams, or whatever, within a certain context. So if you're working with a team that's building software to fly a space shuttle and they have a big stack of documentation, obviously you're not going to go, well, that's not agile. You don't document all that stuff. You should just be agile. You're forgetting the context. If you're building a media player and they're doing all that stuff, the context is different. So your behavior and your entry point and your interactions in that system should be more appropriate.
Very cool.
I feel like I should be talking fast because you call these quick talks. So I don't know if I'm talking too fast. I'm like, I gotta talk fast and get this done. Like, what's
Okay. No, I have one more question here. Here we go. How often has co-creation been better than buy-in in your change management approach over the years?
The most common pattern is people realize there's either a different problem to solve or they don't need a change in the first place. A really great story from a company actually in Toronto. This was a number of years ago. They were expecting to double in size over the next year, and they wanted to, hire an agile coach to do that. So I went in and chatted with them, and long story short, did a Lego Serious Play thing with them. They realized that they know how to reinvent themselves when they need to. So their strength as an organization was being able to respond to drastic change in their industry because of how they've worked in the past. And we didn't actually do anything. So I just said, oh, well, let's just rip up the contract. Forget it. They got out of it what they needed to. So, had I kind of come in and said, well, here's, the maturity model and the process and all the stuff we're going to follow, that might have actually made it worse for them. But coming in with, well, let's talk a little bit about what it is you're trying to do. And younger, cooler company in healthcare. So not like a exciting space, I guess, but just a cool place. And they realized that, hey, you know what? We're actually pretty damn resilient. So when the time comes, we know we'll find the right thing to do. So it was just a reaffirming thing for them that they knew how to move forward. And I was like, this is awesome. It's very cool.
I want to remind people there's a link to a little feedback poll very quick in the chat area. If you can do us a favor before you head out to fill in the form, that'd be much appreciated.
I have one more question for you, Jason. How can these attendees contact you after tonight's event?
Leanchange.org is probably the easiest, or just find @JasonLittle on Twitter.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay, I think I'm going to just do one quick check of the Q&A and make sure we have, that's it for questions.
Cool.
Cool. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
All right. I think, Tom, it's up to you now.
All right. I don't have a whole lot to say. Just thank you very much, Jason, again, for putting the time in and sharing your thoughts with our community. And thanks to all the organizers for all the great work that you do in putting all this together. And with that, unless anyone else has any last thoughts, I'll call it a night. We'll shut her down. Thanks for making another QuickTalk a success, everybody.
Don't forget the feedback, folks. It really helps us to deliver some cool QuickTalks for you.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Be safe.